This House is now resumed. Prior to the suspension, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I trust that you had a good lunch. I know how most of us tend to feel after a good lunch, and so I don't propose to delay the House for too long. But when we took a break, Mr. Speaker, I was trying to make the point that to the extent that we find we need to put a special focus on the economic realities and respond to them appropriately, we must never lose sight of the fact that what we're talking about is significant institutional change, as well as changes relative to social sector and the provision of social services. And that change is always a process that has to be properly managed. And if we are going to properly and effectively manage this type of radical change in our socioeconomic reality, then we have to ensure that there are mechanisms adequate to that task. We can't just construct an economic team and not be advised that we need to look for those who will make that input, which will be of much relevance to those who are likely to be at the bitter end of the fallout from our cutbacks in social services or changes at the institutional level. And so I would like to know that the relevant studies are done and that consideration be seriously given to ensuring that there's more than simply an economic team managing and guiding this process, but persons possessed of the social sensitivities and sensibilities required be a part of the management process. That is what I was trying to say with respect to that particular issue. But we've been hearing much about the rearrangements relative to our debt denominated here in Barbados dollars in the local situation. We have not heard enough, I don't think, with reference to how we propose to handle the external debt going forward. The Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central did make passing reference to the point that a lot was being bandied about in the media with respect to that matter. And I do not know if this document would be considered to be part of the information that's being bandied about. But certainly there seems to be concern in the external sector with respect to those who are holding Barbados' debt, and the fact that they're not properly being engaged on that matter. Do not know the extent to which that is accurate. If the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central is to be taken, what he said at face value, and I do take it at face value coming from that Honourable Member, I still think to the extent that there is confusion in the public arena with respect to that we need to even go further in our efforts to clarify that for public information, but also in the interest of crucial relations with our external creditors going forward, those who historically have been part of our debt portfolio and those who may have more recently come to that position. But this document, which really is an extract of an news item by Reuters, on September 11th, holders of Barbados dollar bonds are expressing disappointment with how debt negotiations are proceeding after the government launched a debt exchange that didn't include external creditors. In a statement released on Tuesday, the external...
Exclusively, sir, from the document?
From the document.
You intend to do something with that document?
We can make this a document.
But is it authentic? Can you speak to its authenticity,
well, as far as I know, it's an authentic...
But can you speak to its authenticity, Honourable Member?
I can only assume it is coming from a reputable institution.
But there's an assumption that might not will pass.
Well,
Member.
if you don't want me to make reference to the document, Mr. Speaker,
I would prefer
will
not, sir.
But I can only tell you that the document is the product of a reputable institution.
But we cannot speak to its
And one with-
authenticity, sir, because
one with
it is
which
a
it is-
copy. It is not an authenticated copy, sir.
One with which we are familiar. I will be guided by you as to whether or not
Yes, sir.
I can quote from it.
You ought not to, sir.
But I can tell you that it's being circulated out there in public media fora and reputable public media fora that creditors externally are not entirely satisfied with the way they're being treated too on the matter of our external debt or default and the negotiations anticipated to flow therefrom. This Honourable House was advised that we have appointed an entity named in this House to spearhead those negotiations. We have already had sentiments being expressed by the External Creditors Committee, I think it is called, with respect to misgivings as to how the matter is being handled. The document from which I will not quote seeks simply to suggest that the creditors are unhappy, that negotiations are not being properly and fully entered into, fully being had, and that any meaningful progress to be made going forward would have to countenance that position, that creditors need more to be involved in what we're doing. If you owed the bank down Broad Street, and I'm sure that you don't, Mr. Speaker, you cannot stand at the top of Broad Street and shout at the bank, I'm defaulting on my debt. You have to enter into proper negotiations and be guided by the management of that institution as to how you may handle your debt and kindly request some rearrangements. And all we're saying is that if the Barbados government does not make sure that this is fully and properly taking place, or if the Barbados government does not establish that those who say otherwise are way off the mark and are totally inaccurate or untruthful in what they're suggesting, then I suspect that we will have a problem. And that is all I am saying. We have to be able to respond to the concerns of our external creditors as well as the domestic creditors. When we did announce the default, we defaulted on local debt, we defaulted on external debt. We cannot seek, even through a medium such as this parliamentary debate, not only to pass a bill, but to advise the public as to the circumstances which will exist going forward around these new arrangements. Do that domestically and not by the same token, do it with respect to our external creditors. And that is all I am trying to suggest, Mr. Speaker, with reference to that particular matter. Now, the Honourable Member for Christchurch Essential also advised us that there's some particular issues with which we have to treat going forward. And perhaps I can come to that in a moment. My particular concern here right now is the likelihood that commercial banks who are invested in government paper in Barbados, since they are captured in this, as I understand it, might be at peril of big losses. And that is a particular matter which would have to be addressed. How is the commercial banking sector in Barbados to be affected by this? And to what extent there's likely to be any kind of fallout from that sector? We owe banks locally, I presume, and I presume further that we owe banks, the parent banks of these local institutions as well. Question is, what is the likely outfall from major losses, perhaps to be suffered or to be suggested for these banks by this particular rearrangement of securities and indebtedness? That's the question. What's likely to happen there? And also the matter of the national insurance scheme, because I understand from what the Honourable Christchurch Essential said that central bank debt or debt related central bank is not going to be included in the calculations with reference to the response of creditors to the offer of government by October 5th, that the central bank portion of that will not be calculated as part of the response because it's so large you don't want to disadvantage the situation for others by including the central bank debt in that. But the question here has to do with the national insurance debt. Because national insurance already is owed by the government about $400 million, I think it is, Mr. Speaker, and if I'm wrong, I could be corrected. That is a massive debt owed to the national insurance scheme by the government. And you are now, if the national insurance debt is captured in this, you are now further going to compromise, if that is the word, the national insurance scheme situation. Again, I see the honourable member from St. George who fully understands all these matters, nodding in the affirmative. And that's a big concern. That's a big concern. Because if you owe already the national insurance scheme almost $500 million, you're now putting this on top of that, so long as they're captured in that pool of entities, institutions, persons being addressed by these rearrangements, being targeted by these rearrangements, then what are the implications for the national insurance scheme? And has anybody paid any attention to any actuarial indication as to what this would portend for the national insurance scheme in Barbados? People are normally very concerned about these particular matters, Mr. Speaker. Now, I want to be very careful here. I can only do what I see to be my duty honestly from this position, irrespective of what people might think. And someone said to me, you know, you cannot be leader of any opposition. The leader of the opposition must be an obnoxious person and have an obnoxious style, and you're not capable of such. And I don't want ever to be capable of such, but I will ask the questions even when they are awkward and even when they attract criticism, which I would prefer not to have. I will still raise the awkward question from an honest heart, because this rearrangement in the security, this debt exchange program represented in this bill here captures pensioners. And I say that in the verdict, captures pensioners, the people who've used monies from gratuities and pensions to make investments and stuff like that. And I say this, Mr. Speaker, and I know some will find it offensive, but I say it. And I say it honestly, because the questions have to be asked, and people would want to know. When this administration was in opposition, it questioned the integrity and the sense of decency and compassion and empathy of the then government, when the principals of the then government reclaimed their 10% on salaries in the midst of a very trying and difficult economic circumstance. And rightly so. Perhaps they ought not to have done it, and certainly they ought not have done it at that time, when the country was positioned in such a situation of peril or pending peril. We shouldn't have done that. And Barbadians were outraged that they did that. And this administration, when then in opposition, I a part of it, we were outraged that they did that. And I think the extent to which they're no longer represented in this honourable chamber is a reflection in part of a measure of that outrage poured upon them by the people through the ballot box. But having gone after them on that particular issue, and justly so, we come now to make these rearrangements that will affect people's incomes and people's quality of life and people's life plans going forward. I'm leading to this, Mr. Speaker. I don't call any names. Now, I understand, and look, Some people question the 26-member cabinet. I have not questioned that. I have not questioned that. The reasons for that have been stated. I will not question that, and I mean that honestly. And I will not question the amount of money that is to be expended upon a 26-member cabinet and the bureaucratic infrastructure that must go along with that. I will not question that. I believe that the members on that side appointed to the cabinet, all 23 in here, and 3 otherwise, I believe that they deserve what they get and more, because Barbadian politicians are made to work hard. Most of them serve well, and then I believe they're not as properly rewarded and remunerated as their colleagues elsewhere. And so that's not the case. I'm putting it all. I will never go, well, I will not go there today. Never say never. And I'm not coming down that road, Mr. Speaker. But when you can bring arrangements that will substantially affect the wherewithal and the well-being of persons, pensioners captured in that pool of persons, and then you engage advisors, whether they're called consultant, called advisor, or senior advisor, and you pay them huge salaries in this current context, then the question must be brought to the fore as to what signals are we sending. Now, let me make it abundantly clear. I have no problem with those who serve under the banner of the ballot in this country being rewarded as they are, so I don't have a problem with this. I don't have a problem with people who give advice to the Minister of Finance or to the government on economic matters, even if they're titled ambassador. I don't have that is deserved. I do have a problem when we go to other levels or categories of advisors. We call them special, and we pay them over $300,000 per year in the current circumstances, if that be the figure. And if that is not the figure, then please correct me so that I can have a proper understanding of, because this is what I'm hearing on the street. This is what people are concerned about. How could you do this to people? This is not my question. This is a question I'm echoing from the voice out there in the public. How could you do this with people who will put their pensions and stuff into these securities, and at the same time, pay any senior consultant, regardless of ethnic characterization, any senior consultant over 300, and if I'm wrong, please correct me before this day ends. I do not want to continue in this unenlightened state with respect to that matter. And I think the public would like to hear, because there are people born and bred here who are quite equipped to advise the government, who have been doing a good job for years, who have not simply just blown in from elsewhere, but they have been quite here for quite a while, and day by day advising this government and advising this government properly. They are qualified, they're equipped, they're reputed and respected by the people of this country, and they do a good job. And I applaud them. And despite the fact that the Minister of Finance has the Governor of the Central Bank to advise that office, and despite the fact that the Minister of Finance has the Director of Finance to advise that office, and other lawfully appointed advisors, and ministers who are skilled in the science or art or both of economics, who can also give advice to the principal minister. I don't know that in that context, if you are paying anybody $300,000 plus per year for giving additional advice, is helping us or sending the right signal. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Some of you look mystified. If you're not hearing that out there, if you are not hearing that out there, I'm hearing that out there. And I'm sorry to be the bearer for you of bad news. But you check, because these are the things on which you will later be judged. That's all I'm saying. With respect to that, Mr. Speaker, if I am wrong, I really do. If I am wrong, I really would like to be corrected on that matter. The Honourable Member for St. Michael East. The Honourable Member for St. Michael East. The Honourable Minister of National Beautification and Environment, I think it is Environment and National Beautification, understands these things. He is a man whose bosom is possessed of a high degree and volume of social compassion. He understands the dynamics of sociological change. He understands the subliminal messages communicated when people from a position of economic theory take policy initiatives without making reference to the social services arena and the philosophy that guides social services. And so he would be able to tell the government, if that is true, and that is what we're doing, we're not necessarily doing a thing that serves our interests, and we will be judged on the basis of that. And I am sure that may be news to him, because I know him. He's my member of parliament. I voted for him. He's my member of parliament. And I know that if he is aware of this type of thing, it will not sit well with him. And if he is a man of principle, especially on these matters that I know him to be, his voice will not be silent in this house on a matter like that. I know the member well. I voted for him. Now, Mr. Speaker, I really want to be true in a hurry. The Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central made reference to this document. Can I quote for this document, Mr. Speaker?
The bill you're quoting.
It is a bill.
Of course you
It
can.
is a bill. It is a bill, Mr. Speaker. A bill of this Parliament, an act to provide for certain institutions and individuals, etc., to be treated to in a certain way with respect to securities and the new arrangement. It's a bill before this House, Mr. Speaker. I can't even find a title for it because it's relatively new to me. I only saw it just before.
Page 4.
Page 5.
Page 4.
Page 4. I'm on
Short
page
title.
5. I want to quote from page 5. Section 5 on page 5. Acceptance of restructuring proposals by instrument holders. That's the title of this section. The restructuring proposals shall be deemed to be accepted where instrument holders holding more than 50% of the aggregate outstanding principal amount of all specified debt instruments submit voting forms under section 4.2. And then 5B said where instrument holders holding more than 75% of the aggregate outstanding principal amount of all specified debt instruments for which voting forms under paragraph A have been received, vote to approve the proposals. I understand that if 50%, and this is not with reference to the number of holders, this is respect to the value of their holdings. If 50% of the respondents, if 50% of the people who are targeted respond, and 75% with reference to the volume of those responding give the affirmative voice, then this goes ahead. The worry is what happens to the rest of the folks. People like the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, Honourable Member for Christchurch South, Honourable Member for St. George South. What happens to people like them, Mr. Speaker, if they should vote no and do not accept this proposal by October 5th and return their forms accordingly? Now, I understood the Honourable member for Christchurch East Central, to say, well, if 75% of the 50% of respondents give us an affirmative voice, then this goes ahead, and the rest of people will have to, well, hope. That's what the government is offering. You have a hope, a prayer, a hope, prayer. That's what I'm hearing. I'm not a lawyer. The lawyers will have to tell us whether or not that is subject to judicial review, legal redress. I don't know. But all I'm saying is, if you're saying to people, we are changing this, if 50% of persons targeted respond, 75% value of those persons represented in that 50% response say yes, this goes ahead, because we're time constrained, we're time bound. We have to get these things in place to meet IMF prescribed deadlines and schedules. What befalls those? Clearly tell us. Don't just say, well, you hope. Tell us clearly what befalls those who don't agree. And those who are legally illumined, tell us whether or not there's legal recourse for this. Now, the central bank debt, like we said, is excluded. I don't know if the debt from the related to commercial banks and other financial institutions, insurance institutions perhaps, I don't know if that is also excluded in terms of what constitutes the 75% response. But these are questions to be answered, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to delay us any further. There'll be other occasions to speak to some of these matters, because we're now getting into this program. The night is still young. It is still early. The shadows lengthen, but it is only dusk. And we believe that there will be time further to speak to these matters. But I just wanted this House to understand this is an urgent thing. Can't treat it lightly by bringing the bill 2 minutes before the debate. You can't do that. And when you speak, though you reflect on what the last fellows did, you can't dwell too much on that. It is what are we going to do going forward, because there's a night of pain ahead, and we want to know that the hand which guides us through the night is a firm and sure hand, and that hand is extended in our direction to help us through this difficult passage. With that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my voice to this debate and this bill before the House, which provides for certain individuals and institutions holding treasury bills and treasury notes and debentures issued or guaranteed by the government of Barbados to facilitate the restructuring of those instruments, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I wish to begin by complimenting the member for Christchurch East Central, who in 2.5 hours, Mr. Speaker, sought to bring simplicity and value to the bill that is before the House. And not just simplicity and value to this Lord Chamber, but simplicity and value to the people of this country, and also to the critics who misinterpreted what he said earlier in the week. And I got calls, Mr. Speaker, messages in abundance of persons, through you, Mr. Speaker, to you, the member for Christchurch East Central, who asked me to pass on a congratulatory note and notes to you for your contribution in this Lord Chamber. And indeed, I join with them, member for Christchurch East Central. Indeed, you are a shining star, not because of arrogance, but because, Mr. Speaker, the juncture at which we find ourselves in, no fault of ours, but a clear, comprehensive, and detailed plan has been put forward to this country by the team, the economic and financial team. And I wish to say, because when I like to spend some time speaking about the members that occupy this chamber, because I heard the honourable member, and I refer to him as my friend. I think we will always be friends. I heard the honourable member made a number of blunders in here this morning and afternoon. And he spoke about the team only being financially focused and coming up with a plan. And he can correct me. I can stand on a point of order when he feels to. But my interpretation to what he said, that this team had no person reviewing the social elements and the social fallout of a plan, if there's supposed to be any. And I say to him, when I look across this chamber, and I look in the eyes of this beautiful young lady, whom I knew from age 13 or 14, a development economist, and I would ask the member for St. Michael West to go and research what a development economist does, so that he understands that this team is not a one-sided team. This is a team that has been put together to focus not only on financial, but also social and development aspects as it relates to this plan. So when you come to this chamber, the honourable member for St. Michael West, please get your facts. And don't seek to in no way diminish the value or the members in this team.
Order, sir. What is the point of order, honourable member?
The honourable member is misleading the House as to the thrust of what I said.
Thrust or what was said?
Thrust.
Please clarify.
I have never in any way said anything that devalues either the qualifications, the quality, or the contribution of all members of St. Michael's South Central. I believe her to be a worthy member of the team, equipped with skills such as she can help in the area under focus. That does not constitute, in my view, a sufficiency of balance as to suggest that the government is taking care to note that there will be serious and significant social fallout, and that part of the change management process will have to be looked at carefully and provided for. That's all I'm saying. The honourable member of St. Michael's South Central is a worthy member of this team and brings certain skills perhaps the other members don't. But that is a sufficient consideration being given to the social negative fallout that we're likely to see under this change, and we have to manage that change properly by properly balancing the team.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to note the time that the honourable member spoke, and that's his second speech in this
2 minutes, just 2
chamber.
minutes. It was only 2 minutes, honourable member for St. George, just 2 minutes.
And Mr. Speaker, I would like back my time. I hope you are cognizant of the time that the honourable member for St. Michael West spoke. And Mr. Speaker, I won't dwell there because I think I made my point, and I think this Lord Chamber recognized my point, and also the people in this country to whom we speak recognize my point, that this team is a well-rounded team, and a team that is indeed very experienced, whether it is at CDB, it is at the central bank, it is in small business, it is in social policy. There's a well-rounded team, a team that the honourable member for St. Michael West helped put together. But I will move forward. Mr. Speaker,
I have to interrupt the honourable member And I believe he's happy to have me interrupt him. I suspect he's being challenged.
Honourable, point of order is
No
misleading the
point
House.
of order. No,
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, as I said, I will move on. There isn't any challenge here, Mr. Speaker. Because I wish to refer to a document, I know it has been made a document of the House, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformational Plan, called the BERT Plan. It has not been. And, Mr. Speaker, we recognize as a team that tough decisions have to be made to close our fiscal gap. We recognize that tough decisions have to be made to stabilize our debt as well and to restore our state-owned enterprises to good health. We recognize that tough decisions have to be made. And in making tough decisions, Mr. Speaker, we in no way seek to what the honourable member described as a, I don't think he used the word bad deed. I don't want to misquote him. Dark deed. Because when we came to government in May, on May the 24th of this year, it indeed was doom and gloom, and indeed dark deeds were done and dished out to the people of this country. And what we have sought to do ever since then, Mr. Speaker, is to provide hope and some light at the end of the tunnel for the people of this country through our programs. And yes, we have a homegrown and a sovereign restructuring program that has been aided by the International Monetary Fund, thanks to the member of Christchurch West, who clarified for the member for St. Michael West. And this program, again, these great minds sat and put this program together. And we're here this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, focusing on this bill. And just a few areas, Mr. Speaker, that I wish to comment on. The quality of life of the citizens of this country have been affected for the past 10 years. And when the member for St. Michael West can speak about the quality of life being affected, I don't think he wants to put this restructuring program into that category. Because we recognize that sacrifices have to be made through every single sector in this country in order for this restructuring program to bear any fruit. And if you recognize what has happened in this country over the past 10 years, the level of taxation and to whom this high level of taxation would have impacted, the level of taxation imposed or introduced by the Democratic Labour Party would have impacted significantly the working people of this country, whether it is the middle class, is the working poor. The last administration policies significantly impacted a certain sector of this country. And what we have sought to do with respect to this restructuring program is to share the burden. That's all we're doing. So holders of capital in this country have now been asked to join in the sacrifice for a short period. We're not saying for 15 years. I heard the honourable member quote in 2033, but he misrepresented this whole aspect of 2033, where we said that by 2033, we expect to see the debt to GDP ratio back down to double digits, around 60 or 65%. That is why we quoted 2033. So I don't understand why the honourable
Honourable for St. Michael West.
In the House, unless I am seriously misled. Is it true that some of the, Mr. Speaker, through you, is it true that some of the aspects of The honourable member is misleading the House unless I am misled, Mr. Speaker. And is it true that some of the aspects of these securities rearrangements stretch for the next 15 years?
As far as I can read, allow on a point of order a question
But,
to be asked.
Perhaps you can.
You want question and
No,
answer?
please let me speak. Perhaps you can forgive the honourable member for St. Michael West if he has not read the document in its totality. These things might happen.
Point of order, I insist, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member St. George South is misleading the House. There are some aspects of this security rearrangements that stretch for the next 15 years.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke to debt to GDP ratio. I never went into instruments or with respect to T-bills and debentures. If the honourable member for St. Michael West wants to rise on a point of elucidation, feel free to. But I speak to debt to GDP ratio that we came and found at 157%. And if we include debt to NIS, the member for Christchurch East Central, that will rise to roughly around 171, 175%, right? Including arrears. But we left office around 2008. And in 2007, our debt to GDP ratio was around 60%. And I know the person that advised the honourable member for St. Michael West would tell him that as well. So this...
Point of order, sir, honourable member.
The honourable member is misleading the House. He pretends to know who advised the honourable member St. Michael West. The honourable member St. Michael West could not have been advised as to this debate because I got the bill while the presenter was on his feet. And I would be happy to have a few advisors, especially since the government has such a large contingent of advisors that they pay such high fees too. Yes,
Continues, honourable member for St. George South, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member seems rattled now. If he wants to speak about someone that is rattled, he's rattled. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish also to recognize that in 2011, no commercial banks wanted government instruments, T-bills and debentures. They didn't want them. We recognize that we have a significant problem. So when the central bank was printing money, and Mr. Speaker, don't let me go there yet, because what the honourable member mentioned in his opening remarks, and I rose on a point of order, the whole aspect of defaulting on a loan payment in June and then in August. And I asked him the question because I knew I was going to answer the question, and I knew I was going to speak right after you. So I wanted to put it in the context, what you would have done differently. Because, Mr. Speaker, that was a strategy to save the Barbados dollar as it was pegged to the US dollar. And I asked the honourable member for St. Michael West again, and I asked him, you can think about it, what would you have done differently? And I can say today, our dollar has been saved. Our dollar, as pegged to the US dollar, has been saved. So I don't mind the pundits and those persons out there who want to criticize this government, because at the end of the day, our strategy is to protect this economy, bring it out of the rut, and to see some growth within the next 3 to 4 years. That is our primary focus. Don't get caught up with the lot of red tape and the red herrings and the professors that are out there trying to criticize this team. Yes, you would always have critics, but we remain focused in our mission to save this country. And the first order of the day was to save our dollar. And I compliment the Prime Minister and this team for over the last 3 months for working assiduously to ensure that we bring back some respectability to this economy. There's hope, Mr. Speaker, there's hope. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to speak briefly on national insurance. Because what this plan, this bill that is before the House, what it seeks to do is to give us some elbow room as it relates to funds roughly around what this program intends to achieve. Is some savings of $500 million in the first year. And if I'm wrong, the Honourable Member for St. Michael West can stand and question or interrupt me. Savings of $500 million in the first year. But I'm hearing that we don't have a plan. And he's saying to me that I remind him of questioning the last government, the questions I posed to the last government. We have a plan. Savings, this strategy to facilitate the restructuring of those instruments through the voting process that you mentioned in your wrap-up will give us some $500 million in the first year of this restructuring plan. And to the lower house and to the public, within the first year of this plan, what we will see, capital works programs for 2018-2019 that is bigger and that will be bigger than what you would have seen for the last 10 years under the Democratic Labour Party. I'll repeat it for you, member for St. Michael West. The $500 million will go towards capital works program for 2018-2019 that you have never seen in the last 10 years under the Democratic Labour Party. So there's a plan for growth in this country. And you will get a road, the member for St. Michael West, you will get a trust loan or a few, and you will get a road. And I will speak to that in my wrap-up. You want to talk about growth? In my wrap-up, in my 30 minutes wrap-up, in the last 5 minutes of my presentation, thank you, Honourable Member for St. Joseph. I have to wrap up too, I can't speak the whole day, my friend and colleague. Now, the whole aspect of NAS payment. Government owes national insurance to the tune of $400 million. To the tune of $400 million. We came and we found that whether it is non-contributory or contributory payments, the last administration, they did not pay back the national insurance, who paid in the non-contributory part of the NAS payment. And then the contributory part, they refused to pay for the workers within central government. So we have to the tune of $400 million. And this restructuring program will assist us in shoring up the National Insurance Fund. And the chairman sits there. He knows that this program is a wonderful program, because when we talk about retirement and pensions, the citizens of this country, they sat on the edge, knowing full well that they had no certainty over the last 10 years that when they reached their twilight years, they would have received a pension in this country. And what this program seeks to do, this program seeks to provide that class floor through the lower interest payment that will go to assist in the arrears to the National Insurance Company. But yet, we don't have a plan. So we are saying to you who sit in this chamber, when you reach your twilight years like myself, and the member for St. Joseph, and the member for St. Michael West, you will receive a pension because of the restructuring plan by this administration. So don't let the people of this country listen to the pundits and believe that there's no plan. There's a plan. And I speak to the Capital Works program. That is what this interest payment will help us do. Fix roads in this country. We talk about social decay. We have houses in the constituency, and I speak home job, I talk about at home in St. George South. Houses that have been affected up to today from the impact of Hurricane Thomas that have not been touched. In St. Joseph, in St. Lucie, in St. Philip, North, West, South, in St. Peter, and I see the member for Christchurch East Central nodding in acknowledgement in his constituency as well. And in St. Thomas, they're waiting on the government, the last government. And that is what monies like this will do. Address some of the social issues. You have people with pit toilets, the pit toilet program. How do you expect to address these matters? So the restructuring plan, it is asking the holders of capital to join with us. Join with us in ensuring that we can return growth to this country. Join with us in ensuring that our Capital Works program and our infrastructural development will see some fruit, will bear some fruit 3 years down the road. I understand there's a challenge with respect to the amount of jobs that we can offer at this stage, and we can't hide from it. We can't hide from it. We have the RE program, retraining, empowering, retooling, and enfranchising. So when we have this $500 million, and there are any displacement that will come through central government, these persons will be employed in the private sector, either in agriculture and in other areas. And Mr. Speaker, I see the Honourable member nodding. If we were to send home government workers to come up with the 500 million savings, it would be close to 70% of the central government workers that we will have to send home to come up with these savings. We have not done that. So the net effect in the restructuring, we will still preserve jobs in central government. Yes, there will be some dislocation. But we have to understand what we are faced with, what we came to office and found. And the Honourable member, he knows very well, because we sat in a number of meetings and we discussed this. We were planning our plans, our fiscal strategies, and our debt strategies way before the May 24th. 2 years before, and the Honourable member for St. Michael West, I know he's true to himself, so I won't say if he's true to himself, because he's a man of God, and I have utmost respect for him in that regard, and other regards as well. He was part of this team, planning for this day, and now we have reached the day whereby we are asking the people of this country. The word is sacrifice. Share a little, give a little, to receive more 3 years down the road. There's hope in this plan. But Mr. Speaker, we recognize the downgrades that we received. Some 22 downgrades, member for Christchurch East Central. We received some 22 downgrades. We had in this country, Mr. Speaker, we had an insurance company, a reputable company, who polluted this country headquarters as a result of the credit ratings, as a result of these downgrades. Yes. You remember that member for St. Michael West? As a result of the downgrades, this restructuring program, as I say to the people of this country and to the Lord Chamber, once we stay on track, we will receive upgrades and not downgrades. Our credit rating will return to some respectability. where investors will begin to see the importance of having our instruments. Investors will want to come to this shore. And we are not only focusing on the financial aspect, because our international business sector, that is why, and I heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, he didn't criticize the 26-strong member team within the cabinet, but he made mention of it. He continues to mention it every time he speaks. So I am not saying he is criticizing it, but at the end of the day, we have someone dedicated to rebuild the international business sector. Because true, we recognize the importance of the international business sector to the growth in this economy. So we have not just picked a 26 or 27 member cabinet out of whims and fancy. There was detailed planning and strategy behind this large cabinet. And each one of these members thus far have earned their keep. They have earned their keep. Thank you, member for St. Thomas. Honesty is our policy. And while we want to, some pundits want to criticize this program, this restructuring program, we have indeed come to this country and declared everything up front and let you know. I heard you talking about breakfast and lunch and dinner. We have to do things differently within the various ministries and within the public sector and also the private sector. We have to begin to re-engineer our methods. We have to become more productive. This restructuring, this strategy that this government has embarked upon is one of the strategies to bring more efficiency to both the public sector and the private sector. And Mr. Speaker, I wish now to speak briefly on the aspect of growth. Because a critical factor in all of this is the whole aspect of growth. And I mentioned earlier why we have restructured our instruments so we can have some cash to address some of these issues. But in addition to that, we have some growth sectors that we have carved out in this cabinet that are critical to local growth or sovereign growth, domestic growth. The blue economy, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South. We recognize that the tourism product is at a stage whereby it is, I don't want to say stale, but we have to bring new ideas, new innovations to attract people to these shores. And we have the blue economy that is there to address land reclamation. When you go to Dubai, places like Dubai, and those places in the Far East, you have islands, some islands offshore in the blue economy, what we call the blue economy on the seas. And the time has come. And I compliment the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast for seeing the wisdom in creating that ministry called the blue economy.
The Honourable Member has 2 more minutes.
And Mr. Speaker, in my wrap-up, I heard the Honourable Member. He mentioned something that is very, very critical. And I want to compliment him, give him kudos, the whole aspect of the export drive and being competitive in this country and reaching our regional and international market. That too will speak to growth in this country. And within my ministry, the Ministry of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, we are charged with the responsibility of building out the national quality policy and the Barbados national quality infrastructure. That is based on pillars such as testing, accreditation, certification, and standards. So when we deal with the issues of our sanitary and phytosanitary issues, we will be able to address, and that will be dealt with through a broad spectrum of national quality policy. We will be able to address the issues of exports and moving into the regional and international markets. So I thank the honorable member. Thank you, member. You know what I'm speaking of. I thank the honorable member for speaking about this, because right spot in the center of the Ministry of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce is the project to build out Barbados's quality infrastructure on those pillars that I have just mentioned. And key to it is a partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture to address the sanitary and the phytosanitary regulations, whereby we can export fish into Europe. So we are not just coming up with a restructuring plan that is only looking at aspects of instruments, but this plan has growth built into it. We have within the Ministry of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, the whole aspect of the trust loans. We believe that this economy, small businesses and entrepreneurship, through both the blue economy and the orange economy, the cultural industries, we will revive and bring some growth and respectability back to this economy. Growth from bottom up. We have to be mindful that the small businesses are critical, and the entrepreneurs, whether it is in the creative industries, and it was privileged on Sunday night
The honorable member wind up, please.
to be at Mahalia's Corner to listen to the talent, the local talent that we have in this country. And I say, in closing, Mr. Speaker, there's hope in our restructuring plan. And I say to the bondholders as I close, holders of capital in this country, join with us in giving a little. Some sacrifice is needed so that within 3 years, this economy will again begin to show some growth and not negative growth. And we will return to that famous phrase by Kofi Annan when he recognized that this small nation was a nation that was punching above its weight. I want to thank you. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member for St. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to join with some of those who have spoken before to welcome you back. I want to join the debate to support the bill before the House. And I want to frame my remarks, Mr. Speaker, along the lines of talking about the cost of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction. And I actually have a number of mixed feelings as I make this presentation. There's a certain degree of anger. There's a certain degree of concern. But there's also, in my heart, quite a lot of hope. Prior to 2008, Mr. Speaker, the Barbados economy would have had deficits, current account deficits, in the order, on average, of 2.5%. Sometimes lower. I'm not sure if we ever went over 2.5% of GDP as the deficit on our current account. From 2008 to now, Barbados
I'm sure the honorable member for Christchurch South does not want to be placed, not put out, but placed out of the House. Placed out, not put out. I'm sure of that. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Moving from a fiscal deficit of 2.5% per year on average before 2008 this country, from 2008 until the present, has been experiencing fiscal deficits of 7.5%. 3 times the size. Unsustainable. But, Mr. Speaker, that is but a cost of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction. Most of us are aware that deficits, fiscal deficits, are financed by debt. Because if you spend more than you earn, you have to get the money from somewhere to pay the bills. And so, once debt is incurred, debt has to be serviced. And with increasing debt, we have had the specter in Barbados of increasing proportions of our national income having to be used to service the debt caused by these significant increases in the fiscal deficit. And when funds are used to service debt, it means, Mr. Speaker, that there is not enough money to buy school supplies, not enough money to give public servants a pay increase, not enough money, Mr. Speaker, to pay those who supply medicines and equipment to the hospitals and to the polyclinic, the entire healthcare system, not enough money to pay the bills. And so we have a situation, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central would have indicated earlier, where our debt would have moved from $6.5 billion to almost $15 billion. And as Barbadians say all across this country, there is not a thing to show for it. But that, Mr. Speaker, is the cost of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction. Government paper held by the central bank. Virtually zero when the last government took office. Now standing at $2 billion. From 0 to $2 billion. And Mr. Speaker, once money is put into the economy, there is a corresponding impact on the foreign reserves of the country. Because once money is put into the economy, it is a significant proportion of it is spent. And so whether you buy sardines or tuna, like I would buy, or whether you buy Apple laptops, like the learned Attorney General would buy, there is a significant import component of all of our spend. And so we had a central bank putting $2 billion into the economy. No wonder that the foreign exchange reserves of this country moved from $2 billion down to $400 million. Another cost of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction. And then we were treated to the specter of 22 downgrades. That is a record in any country, in any hemisphere, and I dare say, Mr. Speaker, in any universe. That must be a record. 22 downgrades in the last decade. And they said that downgrades don't matter. I am not prone to using very strong language, but I remember a word that I heard some time ago, and I checked the dictionary just to make sure it was a valid word. The word is nincompoopery. Because, Mr. Speaker, I use it, I found it in Merriam-Webster, so I assume it is parliamentary, acceptable. I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but when people say to sensible Barbadians that downgrades do not matter, they are treating Barbadians as fools. But the impact of the downgrades was that it reduced significantly our access to capital. And outside of reducing and at one point eliminating, because we have not been able to borrow in the capital markets, so while reducing our access to funding on the international capital markets, it also increased the cost of borrowing. And so we had the Sam Lawrence Castle project, but we can't get funds to put into it. We wanted to develop a cruise pier, but we can't get the funds with which to do it. Some of the cost of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction. We experienced 10 years. And I really, Mr. Speaker, do not mean to belittle terrorism or to play on the emotions of those who may have been impacted by terrorist acts. But I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to this chamber, that a government that encourages people to sell it products and services and then refuses to pay is acting like terrorists would act. And so government was funding its inordinate appetite for spending by adversarial financing. Having people and encouraging people to supply products and services and then refusing to pay those persons, refusing to pay income tax refunds, refusing to pay food suppliers to the QEH and to the school meals department, refusing to pay those who supply medicines and equipment to our healthcare sector, refusing to pay the national insurance scheme non-contributory amounts that should have been refunded to them, refusing to pay rents for the buildings that it occupies, refusing to pay even national insurance contributions for those persons employed in state-owned enterprises, statutory corporations. And Mr. Speaker, when arrears are included with other debt, Barbados is at a point where its debt to GDP is 171%. And you would have heard other honorable members speak to the fact that we're the third most indebted country in the world. The third most indebted country in the world. A country that you can hardly see on a map. The third most indebted country in the world. The very high cost of ignorance, the very high cost of inaction and incompetence. I, Mr. Speaker, am a fan of Caribbean and African literature. I'm not a poet like my erstwhile colleague, the honorable member from St. Michael's South. But even though I like Caribbean and African literature, I also like Shakespeare. Shakespeare's works are divided into comedies, histories, and tragedies. And I want to submit, Mr. Speaker, that if Shakespeare were to write a book called, and I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but if he were to write a book called Stuart and Sinclair, it would be classified as a tragedy. where Barbados is concerned, it is a tragedy. There is nothing funny about what they have done, those fictional characters have done to the country. I had intended to say a little bit about those persons who induced and seduced Barbadians into purchasing bonds at a time when those persons knew that we were sliding. But I think the Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central, dealt quite adequately with persons who do that, then encourage a government to send home 5,000 people, and then turn around and work for institutions who are trying to destabilize the plan that we are putting in place. But I'm not going to speak to that. Like I said, I think that was covered quite well. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, that those actions remind me that they created in my mind a kind of an image of a person with a decent wooden house who takes out all the good 2x3s from the siding and the divisions and replaces those good 2x3s with rotten wood. And after replacing the good 2x3s with rotten wood, then call for gasoline and matches. Persons like that I consider, Mr. Speaker, to be close to arsonists. But at this point, we have a job to do, and we don't have the luxury of spending a lot of time dealing with arsonists and people like that. I think we have, as a country, now to focus. As the Minister of Labour, I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to the country and to all workers in Barbados, that it is not the workers' fault why we are at this juncture in our history. And it is not the fault of any of us in here either. But the reality is that we are here. And we have a responsibility.
I believe that there's one honourable member speaking, and I do not wish for him to be interrupted incessantly by people on that side. Continue, honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad you reminded them that we out here are only out here because of the large mandate and not because we are in any contradistinction to them. But Mr. Speaker, we are where we are, and I am minded to use a verse from a wise man in Scripture, a man called Mordecai. And the verse I want to use is found in verse 14 of chapter 4 of that book. In that verse, Mr. Speaker, Mordecai said to Esther, if you don't act, and I'm going to paraphrase what he has said for our situation. If you don't act, somebody else will provide a solution. And in the process, you will suffer demise. You may even die. And then Mordecai said to Esther, you've been called to leadership for such a time as this. And I want to say to the leaders in business, I want to say to the workers of Barbados and the leaders, their representatives, and I want to say to all of government, those of us who are policymakers, as well as those who support us in the public sector, that we have been called to leadership in Barbados for such a time as this. Barbados was saved by the people on May 24th. Barbados was saved by the people, by the electorate, on May 24th. That, Mr. Speaker, was phase one. We are about to commence phase two. And we do so, Mr. Speaker, with our own plan. The Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan. It is our plan. It is not the plan of the International Monetary Fund. And we need to make that very clear. That needs to be repeated. It is not the IMF's plan. When the IMF staff came to Barbados, they came to review our plan. They came to discuss our plan. And the only reason that we could have reached a staff-level agreement in just over 3 months of coming into office is if we had a plan. Because if we were waiting for the IMF to come and then we discuss a plan, that could have taken 12 months. It could have taken 18 months. But we had a plan because we understood that we were called for this time and to clean up the mess left after the lost decade. They supported it. I want to say, parenthetically, one of the things that really annoys me is that the last administration, after lying and winning an election in 2013, refused to do what a previous Democratic Labour Party administration did after lying and winning an election in 1991. Because after saying that the economy was batting like sobers, at least they had the good sense, if I may use that term, to go immediately to the IMF and get some help and start the process of bringing the country back. The last administration will go down in infamy as having lied to the people, whether it was over privatization or making old ladies pay, old pensioners pay in the bus, having lied to the people, won the election, and refused to do what was necessary to get this country out of the quagmire that it was already in 2013. They, Mr. Speaker, will go down in history for being terrible stewards of their position as leaders of this country. And now we are paying the price for their ignorance, for their incompetence, and for their inaction. I want to say to the workers of Barbados that this Barbados Labour Party was formed out of the workers' struggle. And we must never forget that. This party will remain faithful to its roots. And so workers in this country will not be placed on the front line of any adjustment to the economy. Workers were placed on the front line in 1991. Workers were placed on the front line in 2014. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, in 2019, and for the next 15 or 20 years while we constitute the government, workers will never be on the front line of any adjustment to this economy. We have asked tourism to bear some burden. The room tax, the tax on the shared economy, we refer to as Airbnb. We have asked businesses, other businesses, to bear some of the burden, increasing corporation tax. We have asked those who earn at the high income levels to bear some of the burden, and the tax bracket at the top has gone up. We have asked visitors to this country who did nothing to put us in the situation we are in, and we have asked them, through the increase in the departure tax, and in some cases the room tax, to bear some of the burden, because we were and are determined that workers will not bear the brunt of the adjustment that has to be made. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are asking investors to bear some of that burden. We are asking those who've invested in treasury bills, in T-notes, in debentures, to bear some of the burden. And we have, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central has indicated, we have indicated that those who hold government savings bonds will not be affected. The fiscal space, the money that is freed up with the restructuring of the debt, is the money that will be used to pay income tax refunds. That is the money that will be used to buy buses and garbage trucks. That is the money that will be used to run a country the way a country is supposed to be run. And that space is needed. Those funds are needed because the country has to return to a position of growth and development. If we don't restructure the debt, we will not be able to send home enough people to save the value of our dollar. And Barbados is at one, ad idem, that we have to do all that is necessary to save the value of our dollar. Having to restructure the debt, having to reduce not the principal, but the interest that is to be paid on the debt, is another cost of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction of the previous administration. And there are options available. Devaluation is an option. Mass retrenchment is an option. But, Mr. Speaker, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan is our preferred option. And that is the option that we are pursuing today with this bill. Because we believe that we must craft a policy that allows us to do what is necessary to bring back growth and development to the country, while not sending home people in droves, as though they don't have children to look after and support, as though they don't have aging parents and other elders to look after and support. We will not go the route of treating people, the average worker, as though they don't matter, because that is not what the Barbados Labour Party is all about. Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Peter are concerned about the tough times that lie ahead of us. The people of St. Peter are concerned about those pensioners who may hold treasury bills or treasury notes or debentures, who will be affected more so in the short term. The people of St. Peter are, however, happy that those who hold government savings bonds will not be affected. But, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Peter have sent me here today to say to you and to say to this government that we have a responsibility, not just to those of us in St. Peter, but to the country, to do everything in our power to save the value of our currency and the peg to the United States dollar. The people of St. Peter are clear about that, even as they express concern about the road that lies ahead of us. The last decade of ignorance and incompetence and inaction is now behind us. The people made sure of that on May 24th. As a country, we will have to pay the price. But I want to say to Barbados, through you, Mr. Speaker, that like the proverbial phoenix, we will rise from the ashes and we will soar again. There is and there will be a battle for the country. And it's not going to be a battle of offensive weapons. Because like Isaiah said, we now have to beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. We have to refashion government. We have to refashion our economy. We have to set ourselves on a trajectory for growth. We have to restructure our government and our state-owned enterprises so that we can be positioned to grow the economy in a sustainable fashion. And Mr. Speaker, it can be done. It must be done. And it will be done by this Barbados Labour Party government. I ask Barbadians to keep faith in this government. There will be some pain. There will be some dislocation because there is a price to be paid for the lost decade of ignorance, incompetence, and inaction. But we can do it. We will do it because as a government, we recognize that we have been called to lead for such a time as this. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Philip South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this afternoon to give my support to this debt holder approval of Debt Restructuring Act 2018. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I am ever cognizant of the fact that the honor that has been bestowed onto me should always be attributed to the confidence reposed in me by the people of St. Philip South to come to this honorable chamber and do that which is right for Barbados. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is against that backdrop that I want to first of all join but congratulate the economics team that worked tirelessly to put this program together. Mr. Speaker, you heard this morning when the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central spoke. He said that the last administration ran up debt, well, extra debt, up to $9 billion. And if we were to all pause for a moment and start to wonder what $9 billion can do for Barbados, the first question that you would be forced to ask is, where did the money go? Because, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that we live in a country where anybody of right thinking who pledges allegiance to my country, Barbados, and to my flag, to uphold and defend this honor, would want to side with anybody, regardless to which administration, which political institution, regardless to where your political moorings are, how can you side with any administration that has plummeted Barbados into a financial abyss like this, and then expect to come and criticize those who have taken swift action to bring recovery to what was nothing less than a total fiscal disaster over 10 years. Mr. Speaker, throughout the time that I serve as a supporter in opposition, and then as a candidate for the Barbados Labour Party, I raised concerns on numerous occasions about something that was trending in Barbados that I thought we ought to have paid serious attention to. And I speak, sir, to the downgrades that started to take place in Barbados somewhere around 2010-11, shortly after the government had lost its way, and that there was a lack of leadership, and certainly there was no control, and that we started to see Barbados' sovereign credit rating being downgraded. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I raised concerns about it because at the same time that that was happening, when I sat on the economics team with the opposition, there was the beginning of what is known as quantitative easing, or what we can put in Barbados' term, printing money. And I said then that we are not only getting downgrades, but through the central bank, they have started to print money. My position then, and it has been proven now, is that once this was allowed to continue, we were going to face financial problems in this country that would take serious, very draconian measures to turn around. And Mr. Speaker, sir, you would believe that throughout the length and breadth in Barbados, people were being told, don't mind the downgrades, we are not looking to borrow money on the foreign market. Whilst at the same time, Mr. Speaker, sir, the banks of Barbados, who they were selling government paper to, started to become concerned about the risk involved and could no longer have an appetite for government paper. The government, rather than take action then, which to my mind would not have been as harsh as they may be now, but the government then refused. And so they started to go to the NIS to borrow from the NIS. And when the government continued borrowing from the NIS, but were not paying the NIS contributions that were deducted from the workers' salaries, NIS themselves said, we no longer have an appetite for lending you. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, you started to see a vicious cycle developing, where because of the downgrades, you had limited options on the foreign markets. But if you did borrow on the foreign markets, the interest rates were higher than normal market rates. And Mr. Speaker, on that trajectory, you would not believe that a central bank governor and a minister of finance and the prime minister would all agree to continuing to print money in Barbados when every indicator said you were trending in the wrong direction, and sooner or later you're going to harm your foreign reserves to the extent that your currency peg going to be at risk. And Mr. Speaker, if it is that you were warned, but that you still continued because you didn't do this to expand the private sector or to become so innovative that you gave people an opportunity to start businesses, where then the burden could be taken off government, but that you were doing this to support transfers and subsidies to the extent that a government which said that it could no longer carry the cost of government continued to increase and expand government's expenditure, and transfers and subsidies continued to expand and increase. Mr. Speaker, this is what I call political worthlessness. This is what I call, Mr. Speaker, financial rape of a treasury. This is what I call, Mr. Speaker, an abuse of Barbadians. Because what you did, essentially, is that you set up people to believe that you were their friend, and that you can dangle a carrot in terms of a job so that they can feel that you got their back. But at the end of the day, they are going to pay a higher price for what you did, Mr. Speaker, sir. Then I say to you that if ever there was a devil in the works, it was there when the Minister of Finance was being guided by an advisor who thought that he could become famous by encouraging him to continue to print money in this country. Mr. Speaker, I heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central spoke about Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, and what is now known as the Greenspan put in the U.S. economy. Greenspan was so good at what he did that even at one stage he gave Clinton a surplus budget. Ben Bernanke, on the other hand, came and with the U.S. going through its troubles, started a program of quantitative easing, which to my mind has been deliberately copied by the governor who advised the Minister of Finance of the last administration, not understanding the context in which Bernanke used a program of quantitative easing in the US, through which not only did he purchase government instruments, but that investments went into places like Ford and those kind of big manufacturing entities to keep them together so that jobs could be kept in the private sector and manufacturing in the US could continue. A completely different approach from what we saw here in Barbados, where there was this reckless behavior just for political expediency and nothing more. And Mr. Speaker, it brought us to this. And so this is where we are at. We are at a stage where Barbados has been downgraded to CCC minus. Barbados is a nation with a junk bond status. And so that anywhere in the world, as I've said before in this honorable chamber, when you speak of Barbados's sovereign credit rating, that place of ours, these fields and hills beyond control that are our very own, will be referred to as junk, Mr. Speaker. And I said to you, Mr. Speaker, that if they had thought about this carefully. If they had only cared, we will not be here today. But the fact that we are here today, something has to be done. And in a short 3 months, what has taken place in Barbados is nothing short of phenomenal. Where we have been able to move at pace to restructure this economy to the extent that, one, all of us, every last one of us in this honorable chamber, including the honorable member for St. Michael West, can go to his constituents and say, let us take the pain now because better days are ahead. And if we have to use Jimmy Cliff's hit tune, better days are coming, then that is what it is. And Mr. Speaker, there are a couple of things that I want to draw to the attention of Barbadians. Greece, Mr. Speaker, sir, Greece. Greece has the support of the European Union and the European Central Bank. Mr. Speaker, Greece at one stage went to a program through its banking system, a fiscal program, where they introduced measures to actually cut people's savings in the bank, something called a bail-in. Most of us are familiar with what is known as a bailout. Somebody's in trouble, you come in, you give something, and he's bailed out. But they had what is called a bail-in, where your money that you deposited in the bank, a percentage was taken off. Barbados is not at that stage. But Mr. Speaker, we are not there because this administration holds the reins of government, because that is exactly where we were trending. And all what we have said, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that a couple of things we had to do, and we had to do at pace. One, we took a decision to default on foreign payments. I've heard a lot of views expressed. I have mine as well. But I know, as a businessman, that if anybody can speak with any authority on how this works, then I must be one of those people. And I also know that given what I went through as a businessman over the last 10 years, you had to make a call. You were either going to save your business or you were going to let it go. And so, the institution that is waiting for payment at a time when you have to determine whether or not it's going to be salaries, rents, utilities, and carrying the business, or paying, Mr. Speaker, the lender that you made the call. You will not pick up a phone or write a letter and tell that person I'm going to default. That's not the way it works. Because the moment you do that, they start to move in on you. And so therefore, it's a process that takes place. And Mr. Speaker, I am confused when I hear people talk about you should have called this body or you should have written to this body. That's not exactly the way it works. Because the moment you write or the moment you call, you send off alarms. You get to it, and then you deal with it. And if you can put a system of restructuring in place to show, look, you're not going to lose your money, but I have to take a decision, and this decision that I am taking involves both you and me, because you took the risk equally as I did. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have to contextualize this. I've heard some of the best economists in the world speak. Paul Krugman said that there were times when he doubted himself and he wondered if economics ever worked. But he stuck to what he believed was going to be the solution. Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize laureate, he too during the economic crisis thought that there was doubt, but that you had to stick to a program in order to achieve the results that you want. Mr. Speaker, there are the good ones. Yanis Varoufakis from Greece, who used to be the Minister of Finance in Greece, actually, spoke of the cumulative wealth within the system, that if you were able to tap into that wealth, you can deliver a country from its financial problems, but there must be a structured and organized approach. These people, haven't heard them, Mr. Speaker, have all convinced me that what we have before us is not just bold, but is the right solution for what is taking place in Barbados at this current time. First of all, Mr. Speaker, sir, those people who were induced through all kinds of television commercials and radio ads and newspaper ads to come and take out government savings bonds, and that you were told you can even spend as much as $50, and that your future and your children's future would depend upon it, and that you were at the same time blurring all that was taking place in Barbados, whilst you reduce the interest rates in the commercial banks so that you can tie people into taking government savings bonds, Mr. Speaker, sir, in this country. And that if we as a caring administration, having recognized how people were induced to go after instruments that bore such high risk, at a time, Mr. Speaker, when they all knew that they had run out of options in terms of financing government. And Mr. Speaker, we took it upon ourselves to say, you are protected. You will have your money back. And Mr. Speaker, I may sound like a narcissist, but I don't mind. I don't know many politicians that are not narcissistic anyway, because you have to tell your story. Mr. Speaker,
strong term you're using, some honorable member, as it relates to narcissistic, very strong term.
Mr. Speaker, you can help me sanitize if you so desire, but in reality, it is a mindset, especially in the last administration. It is a mindset. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at what has taken place, there are a couple of things that the Honourable Member for Christchurch Essential spoke to about this morning that I'm really, really, really happy to hear. Mr. Speaker, he spoke to the time value of money, and I don't know if this resonates enough with people. That if you had held your savings, if you had held your bonds or your T-bills, that there was a maturing period in time when you collected your money. And that what they have done, which I think is extremely, extremely reasonable, Mr. Speaker, sir, that you are now in a position where you can enjoy the value of your money while it starts to depreciate over time. And that is because you're getting back part of the principal and the interest as you go along over time, so you're getting the money at its true value whilst money continues to depreciate over time. So that if you had gotten back a lump sum, let's say of $10,000 15 years down the road, the true value of that money will not be the same as if you had gotten it exponentially over that 15 years. And that is the point. So that, Mr. Speaker, even though people are being asked to hold some strain and that things will be tight, the strip payments that they stand to benefit from, to my mind, is as amicable as you can ever want to be in a situation like this. And I'm always, Mr. Speaker, sir, mindful of how CLICO was handled. Because here it is, that you had policyholders who invested their money in CLICO. And that at a time when people were told that CLICO had financial problems and there was a run on CLICO for those who wanted to get their money out. And that the supervisor of insurance advised them not to sell any more policies. They still went ahead and sold more and committed Barbadians into a risk where people have died and left their investment behind, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that we, at a time, Mr. Speaker, argued then that this was wrong and that the government should have been more nimble in dealing with the situation. But they failed to. And Mr. Speaker, what you have here is a government that is so nimble that has been able to innovate ways in which you can deal with this matter rather than have it prolonged in a situation where the country is broke. And all the criticisms that I've heard, I heard a radio program and an investor who said he's a pensioner and that he and his family relied on the interest from the investment that they made. And that is going to be hard for them. It's hard for the whole country, not just one or two people. And it's hard because we have to fix this. But that it is not unreasonable is my case. Because it cannot be unreasonable, Mr. Speaker, sir, when after 1 year, you start then to see repayments coming to you, but more than that, the interest rates will increase so that over time, the payments, the net payments that you're going to get per month, sir, would give you increased cash flow. Mr. Speaker, we have to start somewhere. And if we're going to have to step back to jump forward, then we have to do that. I've always said to people that one of the greatest authors that I've come across, having read his work so many times, motivational author by the name of William Jolly. And I repeat over and over, because he said a setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback. And that, Mr. Speaker, if we were to contextualize what is taking place in Barbados, this is exactly the point. That you, even though there's a bend in the road, you still have to turn that corner in order to continue your journey, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that if we can get people to sharpen their minds and understand that we've only got a setback, that eventually will give us a comeback. But that we have to continue the journey and we have to turn the corner. And so all the wishy-washy criticisms that you're getting, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to remember that this is Barbados and this is our Barbados. And that if we have to do that which Barbadians value more than anything else, and that is the protection of our currency peg, where $1 Barbados dollar is 2 to 1 to the US dollar, Mr. Speaker, sir. Then we don't want to go to a situation where it is 100 and something to 1 or 80 something to 1. Barbadians don't want that. Barbados was sacrificed in order for us to keep our currency peg. And so this is what we have said. We have said that if we were given the government, that we would protect the currency. And that now we have come with the program, and we have delivered the program. And every single Barbadian, every last Barbadian will benefit from this. They will benefit because, one, as these measures are being introduced, this caring government is setting about to give Barbadians a chance to be part of the economic ownership structure of this country through trust fund loans. And if that is not enough, this caring government is giving Barbadians a chance to be part of the economic structure of this country through giving them land to get involved in agriculture, through many of the contemporary techniques involved in agriculture. When I talk about modern techniques, I'm talking about hydroponics and aquaponics and greenhouses and stuff like that.
Honourable Member has 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, that time fly. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to put Barbados first. In my ministry, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am inundated by requests from business people in agriculture for VAT refunds. A situation that has been allowed to lag for many years. As we enter into an arrangement with the IMF, one of the things we have to do is keep our debt current. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, if through this program we can get enough in terms of savings to be able to issue VAT refunds, we're going to do them. So that those business people who are rightfully entitled to their refunds, we get those VAT refunds over a period of time in the short time frame. And Mr. Speaker, sir, there are several Barbadians who didn't get income tax refunds for many years. And those also have to be paid. But the money has to come from somewhere, Mr. Speaker, sir. And in an environment where it is difficult, then you have to introduce measures that can get you, first of all, the respectability that you're going to get in the international markets through land in this IMF program. And then, Mr. Speaker, sir, through the revenue generated from savings that would accrue through this program, we're then able to pay our bills as a country. Pardon? The IMF-supported program. Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe that better days are ahead. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that once we get the full cooperation of everybody in this country, and I know there are lots of people who are suffering, people come to me asking for jobs, and those will be delivered. But unfortunately, we can't deliver in the short term simply because of what we were left with. And I've said to my constituents over and over, you have not lost anything, because when things turn around in this country, you're going to be better off. And that the chance,
wind up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the chance that you get, Mr. Speaker, through these new arrangements, to be part of the ownership structure of Barbados. And I think this is extremely critical, that as we go through these changes, that Barbadians become, every Barbadian is given a chance to become part of the ownership structure of this country, sir. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I joined this debate because it is important that, as Barbadians, we understand not only what is ahead of us, but what will be required of us in order for us to manage a very difficult period in our history as a nation. Our debt restructuring program is probably one of the most urgent and most important steps that we need to take. Our debt restructuring program is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we cannot lay the foundation for growth that would get Barbados out from where it is at. We cannot stay where we are. We cannot stay where our expenditure exceeds our revenue by millions and millions and millions of dollars. We cannot stay where our debt to GDP ratio is 171%. We cannot stay in this moment where tourism is not earning as much as we need it to, where we're losing from the international business sector, where manufacturing and construction are languishing, and where small businesses are closing day by day. We cannot stay in this moment. And the only way to break the chokehold that is on the economy is to restructure our debt, to give the government some fiscal room, to give the government monies that they can redirect to be able to put things in place so that the economy can grow again and so our people can live again. This is why this debt restructuring program is absolutely important. That if we do not do it and do it quickly, Mr. Speaker, because every day that it is not done, it means that there are businesses out there waiting for a turnaround to get more business, but cannot because we've not put anything in place. Every day that we do not find means of creating growth, find means of creating jobs, etc., that there are homeowners who are unable to pay their mortgages because maybe their business has closed or a family member has lost a job, and they are praying that something will turn around quickly. This is why we have to move with haste and dispatch. When I think of where we are, there is no Barbadian that would have believed in 2007 that when we reach 2018, Barbados would be in this condition. We were accustomed being at the top of the pile. We were accustomed performing, being the primary economy in the region, punching above our weight. And to suddenly find ourselves in the company of Greece and Venezuela, to find ourselves the third nation with the highest debt, third highest debt in the world, is a shock to our system. And therefore the Barbadian people deserve an apology from the past administration, and they also deserve restitution for what has been done to our country, what has been done to their circumstances, what has been done to their future. We've inherited a country and an economy that was heading for collapse, and as was pointed out earlier, that was no exaggeration and it is no joke. June 2018 was going to be a date with destiny. June 2018, Mr. Speaker, was a moment known to the past administration, the past DLP administration. They knew that we had a large payment that required significant amounts of foreign reserves to be able to pay it. It required money in our sinking funds to be able to address it. This date was not sudden. They knew this 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. They knew it in January when they did not call the election. They knew it in March when they went to Parliament and set about to bring in their estimates, their budget. They knew it when they called the election for May 24th, that we had a date with destiny in June. And that one of two things would have had to happen. It was either, Mr. Speaker, that we make the decision not to pay that bill, or if we decided to pay that bill, Barbados would then find itself in a situation where it did not have enough foreign reserves to be able to take the country forward to purchase the things that were needed by Barbadian homes and Barbadian business so that we could go about the business of our lives. They knew that. They knew it. And if we had not defaulted on that debt and decided we were going to pay, it meant that within a few months, this nation would have found it impossible to pay for the rice that should be on a supermarket shelf, to pay for the imported meats, or cheese, or milk, or sanitary supplies, or medication, or inputs that we would need to make beer or margarine, to bring in the clothing to put in a store, to provide the hairdresser with the products that they would need to keep their businesses going. That was what was facing this nation. And instead of using their time to right the ship, to do the things that a Barbados Labour Party administration has done in 3 months, that over the last 3 years, they could not find it possible to do that which was right by this nation. Faced with a situation of that nature, Mr. Speaker, any caring, responsible government made up of Barbadians like you and Barbadians like me, what would we do? What would representatives of the people who go to their constituencies and speak with constituents day in, day out, week in, week out, hear their concerns, hear people say, I need a job, I have 3 children and the child father isn't helping, I need a home, I'm being put out because I can't manage my rent. You read the papers and you see a long list of homes repossessed by the bank. You walk Broad Street and Swan Street and see businesses closing every month. What would a government, a responsible, caring government at that moment do? Well, here is what the past administration did. Faced with those realities, faced with the condition of a deteriorating economy, instead of buying the garbage trucks that we urgently needed to take care of sanitation and a safe environment for our children, they took money and built a big building up at Vaucluse for millions and millions and millions of dollars. A building that cannot make any money for us or improve our productive capacity. The Water Authority, instead of laying pipes to provide the much needed water to our old system, they built a building at Pine Hill. Meanwhile, they buy community water tanks for Barbadian people to go back 50 years, where they have to go outside of their homes with buckets, walk with it on their head to carry water into their homes. That is what this government did. That government did. And to add insult to injury, Mr. Speaker, I cannot express how angry I was, because there is no possible excuse that I can think of for a government about to have an election could go to Parliament and vote a budget literally weeks before a general election, breaking a time-honored tradition of governments calling elections in such a way that whoever is the new government gets the opportunity to set the budget, because they're the ones that have to execute the plan when the election is over. But what did they do? Not only did they vote a new budget, I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. Speaker, but They took those moments between the voting of that budget and the calling of the election to spend as much money as they could, to get rid of as much of the citizens' taxes as they could. They signed contracts for 2, 3, 4, 5 times the possible value of such services. They took the time to try to legitimize that which did not make good governance. Like finally passing approval for the cement building down by the flour mill, giving permission for it days before an election. Paying people monies that any responsible government would have known was unjust to the people of Barbados because it was so excessive. And at the same time, busy selling out everything that we have in a major fire sale for next kin to nothing. And we now find ourselves as a new government having to honor some of these transactions because the people have a legal right to expect that we will follow through. And this has been unfair to the Barbadian public. So what has occurred? This new Barbados government now finds itself with a budget where a lot of commitments have been made, not to the essentials of the economy, but to padding other people's pockets. And we find ourselves in a moment where we can no longer, in all conscience, continue the actions that have helped to dig the hole that we are in. Things like printing money, or just drawing ad nauseum from the national insurance to pay salaries, or to continue not paying arrears. Mr. Speaker, those actions are irresponsible and destroy the confidence of people to invest in this nation. And therefore, having come to office with our budget compromised, coming into office, Mr. Speaker, with debt at 171% of GDP, coming and finding ourselves with a bill that requires significant amounts of foreign exchange, we had to move fast, we had to move with a plan. I want to congratulate this government for the rapid speed with which they moved to arrest this problem. That despite what the cost was going to be, we needed to safeguard the future of our citizens by taking swift action to scotch the bleeding. And what were some of the things that we did? Our first priority was to shelter the vulnerable. And if you remember, Mr. Speaker, our Prime Minister spoke at length, frequently, about the need for us to provide for those who've been suffering in the economy for a long time. And this was why pensions were increased. This was why civil servant salaries were raised. This was why the NSRL was removed. This was why we put in place the things to help ease some of the pressure from off the most vulnerable in the economy. Because we recognized that we had to shelter them. This was why the general savings bonds that government put out, which are bought by ordinary Barbadians, which would be bought by regular pensioners, that we safeguarded those from the debt restructuring. And we asked the other institutions, the insurance companies, the banks, the other large investors who would have bought treasury notes and bills and debentures, and other types of government bonds. We asked them to share in the burden. It was necessary that we do this because it was important to save the country. Now, why was this important? Why did we get here? I took some time, sir, to look at the Greek crisis. I remember our previous Prime Minister constantly referring to, but we're not Greece, but we're not Greece. And I was wondering why he was using that example in the first place, because we were never any comparison with Greece. But having looked at where we are now, I could see why he was saying that, because he knew where our economic profile was heading. And in an analysis on the Greek crisis, Lionel Reynolds pointed out what were some of the characteristics of this crisis. And when I read it, it was like reading Barbados. Here's how he described the Greek crisis, what happened to the people there. There was high unemployment. He said there was a labor deterioration, meaning the conditions under which labor operated deteriorated in terms of the hours people got to work, the pay people got. The extra protections were removed because now people were vulnerable and would agree to anything in order to keep a job. There was a stranglehold on the lower middle class, making it impossible for them to be able to meet their obligations and keep their businesses going. Greece experienced a brain drain. It talked about an increase in homelessness. And Mr. Speaker, I could relate to those things because I can tell you that in St. James South, I was constantly hearing parents crying out that my child has a degree, but the child cannot get a job. And I'm going to have to send this child overseas, otherwise they cannot get a start. In St. James South, I've had so many people come to me and say, Miss Husbands, cannot pay my rent. And I'm going to be put out at the end of the month. Can you help me? I have people who sleep on the street. And that is because of this crisis that the previous government created. And now we have to find a solution to get us from out of it. But it didn't stop there. It talked about increase in suicides. In Barbados, we didn't see many suicides, but we saw a lot of sudden deaths. We saw a deterioration in public health. And Mr. Reynolds went on to do an examination as to why did this occur? And he gave a very interesting answer. His answer was the culprit of the Greek crisis was the competition between political parties to offer patronage, to offer welfare populism. And when I studied these two terms, I said to myself, well, indeed, this describes what has happened in Barbados, where competing for the vote, our economy was put at risk to provide people with flat screen TVs, but at what cost, Mr. Speaker? By giving to those who want to come to our shores tremendous incentives that would hurt our tax revenues, that would compromise our economic landscape, to hand out largesse, to hand out jobs in state enterprises where there was no work or there were no materials, to constantly pull from the private sector, to pull from the pocket of the consumer, to continue the increased employment at state enterprises to the detriment of the rest of the economy. And Mr. Reynolds stated that these actions created the problem in Greece. And I'm saying that these are contributing factors to where we are here in Barbados. So what it is that we had to do? I shared, first of all, we had to shelter the vulnerable. We also had to stop the bleeding. And it's important for people to understand why you had to stop the bleeding. It's like falling down a 100-foot well, Mr. Speaker. And somewhere 20 feet, 40 feet before you hit the bottom, you try to do something to stop yourself from falling further. And what the Barbados Labour Party government did, we had to look at how we could cut expenditure by repurposing some of our state enterprises, looking at merging some of them, removing a number of them from off of the government purse. We had to find ways to stop the bleeding. We also had to rebuild confidence, to stop the fiscal madness, like the printing of money, draining the INS. What we had to do was to start to live within our means. We then are seeking to position ourselves for growth. And it's important that Barbadians understand this, that while we've had to put some tax measures and share the burden, spread it across as many groups as we can, so the burden is shared by everyone, so that we could stop the bleeding in the economy and we could have some space with which to have some funds to be able now to move forward, because you have to find funds to move forward. It means that while we've had to put taxes, while we've had to make adjustments to the civil service, we now have to take some of that money and help ourselves get forward. So it means investing money in our SMART program for the nation, to ensure we put in place the technology and the processes that would make the civil service efficient, that will help every Barbadian to have cutting-edge technology available in terms of training, in terms of having access to Wi-Fi, creating in Bridgetown a smart city, ensuring that we can use the technology to help us to build out new enterprises and to engage the global stage to do business. It means we have to invest in the renewal of our cities, that we have to refurbish the country. So while on one part we have to cut and there is pain, on the other part we have to spend judiciously to grow the economy. I am concerned sometimes, Mr. Speaker, when in the newspaper you see a picture, and it is heartbreaking, maybe of a person in a home in a dilapidated state. And the unspoken question is, now that you're the new government, what are you going to do about it? What I want to be able to say to our population is this: our hearts go out to that person, and you can believe that every effort will be made to relieve that person of that condition. But that is just one among maybe 20,000 or 30,000 who are in that condition. That may be one out of 10,000. And if we are to respond to the total need that is in the Barbadian economy, then we have to take resources and put it into growing the economy so that we can generate sufficient income that we can take care of all of the needs and not just one, not just two, not just the ones that are highlighted. And that any responsible government would recognize the absolute importance of doing this. If we are going to build an economy that is going to be able to restore Barbados to where it needs to be, where people could live in a secure country, where young people can look forward to getting a job, where when you open a business you have a reasonable chance of it succeeding, or when you retire, that you can retire in safety and security and have financial security as well. If that is going to happen, the only way it will happen is if we're able to build enterprises that are strong. And we can only do that if two things occur. One, we have to refit the civil service so that it is able to help us with the ease of doing business, that they can move efficiently and swiftly and be responsive to our economic needs. And then we have to create a high-end worker. We have to be able to do retraining across the nation, in every school, in every business, in every corner of the civil service, that every single person in this society is retrained to be able to operate at the very highest global standards, so that our strategy for the renewal and the rebirth and the rebuilding of the Barbados economy can become a reality. It will not happen without that type of investment. And therefore, citizens will see and experience that the Barbadian government, the Barbados Labour Party, will be undergoing a set of investments in some of these key activities that will help us to be able to reposition ourselves for growth, to get out of the hole. It's not enough to stop the fall in the well. We now have to crawl out.
The honourable member has 2 more minutes.
Last point I want to make is that we need to attract new investment. And sir, I am so pleased to see the confidence that has returned to the international community, to the regional community, to the local community, that as they have watched this new Barbados Labour Party government operate responsibly, operate in a way that you can trust and rely on policies to deliver, that people are willing to come back and invest again into Barbados. But the most important thing of all, Mr. Speaker, is this. We cannot get out of this hole on the efforts of 30 people. That it is going to take more than cabinet ministers to get us from where we are. What is going to be needed is that as we introduce changes to the systems and processes in government, we are going to need the effort, the mind and heart of every civil servant to recognize that it cannot be business as usual. All of us will have to make a sacrifice. All of us will have to make changes. All of us will have to work differently to be able to make the plan work. It's one thing to have a plan. It is another thing to make it work. It's going to take every civil servant to do that. It's going to take every single Barbadian to recognize that this task is not just a task for politicians, but that each of us has a role that we must play in our daily lives. It means that workers have to get up on mornings and get to work and be on time, and more importantly, while they are at work, produce at the very highest level. That must happen in every single enterprise. It means, sir, that every citizen must understand that he or she must contribute to the betterment of the country and not add to the cost of the country. It means that we must teach our children not to destroy school equipment or to destroy people's property or the buses, because every time we have to replace them, it costs the government money.
Do I remember wind up, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to commend the bill to the Honourable Chamber. I want to commend it to the Barbadian public, because indeed this will help us restructure our debt, give us the fiscal space, the elbow room we need to make the investments to take us forward, which in the end will benefit every single Barbadian. I am obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do not intend to delay the House for a very long time in my presentation, as I think that all the other members who've spoken before me have done a tremendous job in explaining what this bill is about, explaining what the impact will be, and explaining what we came and found. And I will briefly touch on those, but I must commend all the other all my members who spoke, especially the member for St. James South, who really made an admirable contribution to this debate. But I could not say that without singling out the honourable member for Christchurch East Central, who led the debate and went through item by item and line by line what impacts this particular bill will have on the people of Barbados and what we intend to achieve by going through this exercise. Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm trying to keep with my commitment. I don't know how long it will last, but I'm trying to keep to my commitment to myself to try to find a verse from the King James Version that aptly suits the matter that we are debating. And, you know, it brings to mind that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I was drawn to Ezekiel 22, verse 12. And I know that the honourable member for St. Michael West would be quite tickled at this particular verse that I have chosen. And it reads this: "In thee have they taken gifts to shed blood. Thou hast taken usury and increase. Thou hast greedily gained of thy neighbors by extortion, and hast forgotten me, saith the Lord God." And let us understand, usury is interest. And interest and loan terms and time of loan is essentially what we are discussing today. And we have to understand that when you enter into a loan, or when you take a treasury bill, or a bond, or a debenture, it is essentially an exercise in the quantum of interest and the time at which you will be holding that paper. And that is why this is so important to this particular debate. And I heard all the honourable members say, and I have to agree fully and wholeheartedly with all of them. This exercise, Mr. Speaker, is quintessential if we are going to save the Barbados dollar. This is the fundamental reason why we are going through this debt restructuring and this IMF-supported program. Because we have to do three things. We have to save the Barbados dollar, we have to save the jobs of the people of Barbados, and we have to save Barbados itself. Because if we don't do those three things, we will be off track and heading into oblivion. You know, when we look around and we see other countries that changed their peg to the US dollar or floated the US dollar, floated their currency to the US dollar, and we see some that would have started out small, 10 to 1, 12 to 1, that have now reached $100 and odd to 1, 80 and odd dollars to 1, and they never go back the other way. They always tend to get worse and worse. So we, as a Barbadian people, have made a conscious and correct decision that we will do whatever we can, whenever we can, and wherever we can to make sure that we save that peg that we have to the US dollar. Because it is intrinsically and appropriately tied to the standard of living that we have enjoyed and to the standard of living that we want our children to enjoy and that we want our grandchildren to enjoy and that we want our great-grandchildren to enjoy. And what happened, unfortunately, is the last administration put that at risk. You know, Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of a story about the Pied Piper. You know, and you don't hear little children talking about these stories like you used to one time. And for those young people amongst us, well, not necessarily in this room, but that may be listening through the benefit of the internet or the benefit of radio, I will go through why I say it's like the Pied Piper. The story, I believe it was in Hamlin, spoke to a particular village that had a problem with rats. And the village was overrun with rats. And they heard of a particular guy called a piper who had a magic pipe. And they could employ that person to play his pipe and lead the rats away from the city. And they came to terms and arrangements with him to pay him a certain amount of money once he had provided the services for the town. And once he played his pipe and led the rats away, Mr. Speaker, would you imagine that the townspeople then decided that they were going to renege on the deal? That they had lied to the piper? That they had told the piper that they were going to pay him X, and then after he did the job, did not come up with the money that they had promised him? But the piper had a secret weapon. Because that pipe was not magical only on rats. Because he then used his magic pipe to lead away all the children of that particular town. And those people could not save their own children because they were not prepared to negotiate with the Pied Piper. Well, Mr. Speaker, I put it to you that if we are going to save our children, and if we are going to save our children's children, and if we are going to save our grands and our great-grands, we have no choice but to negotiate now. We have to accept that we have to restructure the debt that we have incurred over the last 10 years. There's going to be pain, but everybody knows that there is no gain without a little pain. So we need to go through the pain to get to the gain at the end. And let me make it clear, Mr. Speaker, this program is not a standalone. This program will run in collaboration with our Retool, Retrain, Empower, and Enfranchise program. Because they cannot be seen as one part or one prong. They are all acting together to be able to reduce the debt that we have suffered. And this program is anticipated will save the people of Barbados in interest payments $500 million a year. And what does that mean? As the Honourable Member for St. James South said, it will give us opportunities to use that money to do the things that the other administration neglected to do. It will give us a chance to do things in St. Michael Central, Mr. Speaker.
I'm grateful to you, Honourable Member.
And I know that you'd be happy for things being done in your constituency. And all of us, because all of our constituents have carried the burden for too long. And it is now time that they should get a little ease. Now we recognize that there's going to be some problems, there's going to be some pain, but we have programs in place to ease that pain and ease that burden. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, and I will say it every time that I speak on this. The last administration did not have any growth in their economy. They could not get the economy to grow. So what did they do? They accumulated debt. They swapped debt for growth. So because there was no growth, they went for debt. Year by year, no growth, so they increased debt. And what we have to do to reverse this situation is to swap out debt for growth. What that means, capital expenditure programs, road building, housing construction, developing our infrastructure. That is how we will bring back growth to this economy. And you know, Mr. Speaker, when I tell people that they took this economy from $6.9 billion in debt to $15 billion in debt, people say, no, man, that ain't true. That can't be true. That gotta be a lie. I'm sure the other honorable members in here would have heard people say that. But I have come to this honorable house today to show the evidence of how they took this economy from $6.9 billion to $15 billion. And that's why I have these stack of estimates here in front of me, Mr. Speaker. Because, and I only need to look at the front page, because the most important thing on the estimates is the front page. That is why it's at the front. And what it says here, and the most important line, is the estimated excess of total expenditure over current revenue. What does that mean? That means that the money that you're spending more over than the money that you have collected. So therefore, that money has to be financed in some way. And how that money is financed? That money is financed through debt. And this is how they took us from $6.9 billion to $15 billion. And I'm going to go through every single one. 2008 to 2009, the deficit, which means they had to get debt of $670 million, 2008 to 2009. 2009 to 2010, the debt had to go up, and it's cumulative, which means it adds on $814 million. That means that it had to get debt for $814 to meet these estimates. 2010 to 2011, a real big and bumper year. They had to get $1.5 billion of debt in order to meet the estimates, because they had a revenue of $2.5 billion, but they were going to spend $4 billion that year. And for, you know, and they got some people that don't understand what billion means. It's 1,512 million. 1,512 million in debt that they had to put on the people of Barbados. 2011 to 2012, another $1 billion in debt. 2012 to 2013, $990 million in debt. 2013 to 2014, $1.2 billion in debt. 2014 to 2015, $1.4 billion in debt. Oh Lord, the bumper year, Mr. Speaker. 2015 to 2016, $1.766 billion in debt. 2016 to 2017, another bumper year for debt. $1.656 billion in debt. 2017 to 2018, the last year that the administration was in, and the election year on top of it, $1.59 billion in debt. That is where the debt went, Mr. Speaker. And you know, people do not believe when we tell them that they took this country down in debt. They didn't do it in one fell swoop. They did it year after year after year, cumulatively. And when you add up all of that, that is why we became the third most indebted country in the world. That is why. And that is why. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, that is why we have had to come here today and correct the problems and correct the difficulties and correct the debt that they have put us in. But it goes a little further than that. Because these measures today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are designed that not only the average Barbadian, not only labor must carry the burden. Well, I said it here multiple times when I was on the opposition benches, where we always knew whenever they were coming, because the people had to bear the burden. Every time they brought a budget, the people had to bear the burden. Every single time. I knew it before they talked. The people had to bear the burden. The people, meaning the average person in the street, they had no concept or idea about spreading the burden to capital, to the owners of capital, about spreading the burden to the tourists, the people that come and visit our shores. But this administration said, no, that is not the way we are going to play it. It cannot be that labor carries the burden every single time. It has to be that those who own capital got to bear the burden. And that is what this particular bill is about. It's about people who own capital in this country, people who bought treasury bills. And you know who those predominantly are? The institutions, the banks, and the insurance companies. They have to take some of the burden that they were not taking before. Because multiple and many hands make light work. You heard it multiple times. So, and I'm not going to use the honourable member for Christchurch, West Central, that no work makes light hands. That is not this particular, that is not this debate. That is not for this debate today. That is not for this debate today. That is not for this debate today. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to make it clear. What these measures are doing, which I support wholeheartedly, is to spread the load. Get the institutions, and let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker, and I feel very strongly about this. Those institutions, like the banks in Barbados, they were complicit in what we are in today. Because if they were not feeding this great need for debt constantly, the previous administration would have had no choice but to restructure this well before we got to this stage. And what made it worse, Mr. Speaker, is the last governor of the central bank. I am not allowed to call Delisle World's name in here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so I wouldn't call it.
Mr. Speaker, that's
I wouldn't call it.
I remember you're not allowed to. So
right, I'm not allowed to call Delisle World in here, and I would not call it.
Please don't.
I would not. But the last governor of the central bank, Mr. Speaker, was absolutely complicit in getting us in this position that we are in now. Not only by giving the previous administration some of the worst advice they could have ever gotten, causing us to go down this debt trail, and causing the people of Barbados to now have to suffer the pain of getting this debt restructured. And he went further then, because when he recognized that the appetite for government paper was waning, he then turned around and delinked interest rates. The banks took the interest rates down from 2.5% down to 0.5% on savings. And now I understand there's 0.01%, 0.1% at the highest and 0.01 at the lowest. You know, and these are the same institutions that in our worst times made $2 billion in profit off of the backs of the people of this country. And now that they're being asked to understand that we have to restructure the debt and they have to play their part, they won't give the country trouble. The same country that has supported them, not for the last decade, not for 20 years, but all my life, 50 years, there's been a CIBC and a RBC and a Scotiabank making money in Barbados constantly and consistently. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it pains me. Because there was a time in this country that if you had a mortgage and you came into some money and you went to pay off your mortgage, you know they used to charge you a penalty if you went to pay off your mortgage. And I spoke about it in this honourable chamber. And somehow they heard and they stopped charging penalties for people paying off the mortgage. I'm not saying it's because I spoke, but I recognize...
That was in 2018, when Honourable Member?
Pardon?
When was that? Not in 2012 or 2011?
No, Mr. Speaker.
I suffered the same fate also.
Yes. And it was scandalous what they used to do. And if we speak about these things in this chamber, maybe they should listen. Maybe they could be moved to do something different. Because it cannot be about a bottom line anymore. It has to be about saving this country. And our corporate institutions have to join hands with the government and work together to save Barbados. And not be obstacles. And not try to put stumbling blocks in our path. Because they are in this with us. Because if we as a country cannot do well, they cannot do well. And you know, banks in Barbados are some of the most risk-averse institutions you could ever find. And you know, it pains me, Mr. Speaker, because they charge 7% and 8% here in this country. But in their home country of Canada, you know, they charge 3% and 2.5% and 4% for a mortgage. But they get away with that because that is what we allow them to get away with. That is what we allow them to get away with, Mr. Speaker. And somebody has to be prepared to get up and say these things. And I am one, you know, the Prime Minister once said about me that I am fair, but I am also fearless. And that stuck with me. Because in all my dealings, I try to be fair. But if I have to get up and speak truth to power, I will do that. And that comes from the fearless side of me. And, Mr. Speaker, I am saying that if the commercial banks have any sense, they will work with the people of Barbados. Because they have made billions of dollars off of our backs over the years. And it is time now for them to play their part. Mr. Speaker, I understand that part of the BERT and the IMF-supported program requires that we cannot carry any arrears. And I think that's an excellent thing, because it means that all of the people who are owed VAT refunds will get a chance to get their money back. All of the people who are owed income tax return money will get their money back. All of the small suppliers of goods and services who've been owed by multiple state-owned enterprises will get a chance to be paid. And that going forward, people again can be confident that the government of Barbados does pay its bills. Because over the last administration, people shied away. There are companies that were saying they were not taking any LPOs anymore because they were not sure that it would get paid. There were many times where you could not get drugs at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital because the drug companies were not being paid. We need to put all of that behind us. And we need to chart a path for Barbados. And I want to let the Honourable Member for St. Michael West hear me carefully. The BERT program is a Barbados-owned program supported by the International Monetary Fund. It is our program, and we are going to own it, and we are going to make sure that it's successful, and we're going to bring prosperity back to this country at the end of that program. We are working hard on it. We are making sure that it is a successful program. And once we all work together, we will be able to achieve what others have failed at. And we are not going to get ourselves back in this position. This is a program designed that when we are finished, nobody would have to come back years in the future and say, how we get back here again. That ain't going to happen. Because we're going to put legislative arms in place, we're going to put programs in place, and we're going to make sure that Barbados is on a sustainable track going forward. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, sir, in my very brief intervention this evening, let me first of all welcome you back to the chair, since we knew that you were not 100% the last time you were there. We're happy to see you again today, and you are in fine voice. I rise to support this debate this evening, and we have had a lot of food for thought, and I do not necessarily wish to rehash some of the things that were already said, but we must emphasize a number of things and remind the people of Barbados of what this administration, this new administration has inherited. Simply put, it was a state of financial chaos. You heard persons talk about the debt. You've heard, and I must commend the Honourable Member for Christchurch West in his great exposition there. I was wondering why those estimates were so highly stacked, but they now understand, and I think that that is a good document that we must put together and let the people of Barbados know on an annual basis for the past few years what had happened, what has been happening in this country. It was clearly an exhibition of careless, worthless, and irresponsible behavior by the past administration. And the problem is, one of the things that I must say, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that...
Worthless, sir? Honourable Member,
I withdraw that word,
the word
sir.
worthless is really not an English word anyhow. That's to begin with, and B, it is unparliamentary to speak in such terms.
I withdraw, Mr. Speaker, sir. But scandalous, careless, and worthless behavior, Mr. Speaker, sir. Not looking at the caring about this country at all. And I am peeved, I am annoyed, I am angry this evening, Mr. Speaker, because that position and the position they took has caused me, as a young parliamentarian, entering into politics in a position now where I can hardly do anything for the people of Pike Corner or Caveville or Rockfield or Bourbon. Cannot find jobs because that administration, the last administration, has put this country in a bind. And we must remind the people of that. There were the chief cook and all the washers in it, the former Prime Minister, Mr. Silent, the former Minister of Finance, a member for St. Michael Northwest, and I thank the Honourable Member now for having relieved us, Mr. Speaker, sir, of that albatross around next to the people of Barbados. And the third one, Mr. Speaker, the former governor of the central bank that would, over the past couple of weeks, be parading or putting forward cases in this country, telling people that 4,000 and plus people will be laid off and so on. Planting the seed of discomfort in the hearts, trying to plant in the hearts of the people of Barbados, Mr. Speaker, but not telling them at the same time that he was working, he had, when he was the governor of the central bank, that he had some people called new state advisors to restructure, and now it's talking to those same people to get them to advise our creditors not to accept what Barbados is doing, making it difficult for us. And these are things that the people of Barbados must know. They must know, Mr. Speaker. This economy was heading, as we clearly know, was heading down the wrong road. And I thank God for May the 24th. It saved Barbados, because the people of Barbados realized that we must do something. There's no way. In our CARICOM neighbor Grenada, you had 15 love. But Barbados, we doubled it. We said we ain't want none of them at all. the people of Barbados came together and said, look, enough is enough. We got to stop the rot. Mr. Speaker, sir. And I thank God for May the 24th. And I now want to say a couple of things, Mr. Speaker. I respect highly the Honourable Member for St. Michael West. But he said some things today that I cannot agree with. And I have to defend this decision and this program of this administration. And the Honourable Member talked about we are bringing a program when there are low tourism receipts and nothing is happening in manufacturing and so on. That is the very reason we have to bring the program. Because nothing is happening anywhere. We have to get growth. We have to get things happening in this country, Mr. Speaker. And we provide breakfast. And you may not like we call them breakfast, but I know and you know too that when the children of Israel had to go through the wilderness and spend 40 years in the wilderness, God provided manna. So we got to provide breakfast, give them something, and listen, the breakfast is in a number of things that we instituted. We front-loaded a social program, increasing in pensions, $5 million to welfare, $5 million between the RDC and the UDC, $10 million per year in trust loans, $10 million in equipment, MTW, that we can fix roads and all those kind of things. And we got 30 roads coming with the CAF project. So the people of Barbados ain't going to be suffering, I remember, for Christchurch, for St. Michael West. We are putting things in place to cushion it. We know it will be difficult, but we have to take this road. We are a government that is bold and will do what we have to do, while at the same time, is no, we got to do it now and never. You know that song? We got to do it now. We have to do it now, Mr. Speaker. And I talked yet about the toilet program and the 5% increase that the civil servants got. So this government is responsible and responsive. And Barbadians knew that things are bad. They know, and they're therefore willing to sacrifice. They are resourceful and they're resilient, Mr. Speaker. And they're prepared to dig deep for love of country. That is what is guiding us. I will not tell anybody, as the past administration did, to wrap themselves in the national flag, because I know you see that. And on reflection, they wrap themselves in the national flag, and what was supposed to be for the country, they keep it. Huh? But as I came across the Chamberlain Bridge today, and I looked up at this building, I saw the flag of Barbados flying high. I am going to be glad that when the history is written in this country, Mr. Speaker, that I, Peter Phillips, that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East, and the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, and the Honourable Member for St. Philip North, and all these Honourable Members in here will be part of the history of this country and bring back this country to where it ought to be. I am happy. I made no apologies for that, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'm happy to go and be a part of it. And I say this, Mr. Speaker, in closing. Weeping may endure for a night, but there will be joy in the morning. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I move that these honourable proceedings be suspended until 6:05.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 6:05 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber is adjourned until 6:05 p.m.